It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time, and you're now watching Q News. We begin our transmission with a special coverage of the rising escalations in Lebanon as Israeli aggressions intensify across the country.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
704 Israeli raids on the Baalbek Governorate and Bekaa Valley have so far killed 282 and wounded 777. Israel has been focusing on bombing civilian homes and deliberately committing massacres against residents, as seen in the city of Baalbek and many villages in the district. Buildings adjacent to international and main roads have been cut off or obstructed in order to sever the connection between towns. Hezbollah has announced its engagement in clashes with Israeli forces along the Lebanese border. Hezbollah reportedly targeted an Israeli infantry force attempting to advance near Hatziyah and forced them to retreat. Hezbollah also claimed that a large explosion hit advancing Israeli forces, resulting in casualties. The Israeli occupation forces have launched heavy airstrikes on the southern suburbs of Beirut. The neighborhood of Shwaifat al-Umra was targeted after evacuation warnings from Israel. Lebanese local media reported that 12 strikes hit the southern suburbs last night. Israeli media has reported the interception of 3 rockets fired from Lebanon. They added that 2 other rockets landed in open areas. In response, Israel's Home Front Command advised residents of Kiryat Shimona and surrounding areas to stay close to bomb shelters. Israel has launched strikes at Lebanon's northern city of Tripoli and assassinated a Hamas leader. This marks the first time that Israel has struck the city. Israel has expanded its strikes on Lebanon in recent weeks after nearly a year of exchanging fire. The Israeli military has not yet commented on the strike. For further analysis on the escalating offensive on Lebanon, we're joined by Palestine's permanent observer to the UN, Ambassador Riyad Mansour. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q.
Thank you for having me.
First, let's start off from your understanding of the Israeli strategy, and as a representative of the state of Palestine, and as a Palestinian yourself, do you see what's happening in Lebanon as a recreation of what's occurred in Gaza?
Well, first of all, we condemn the strongest possible term the aggression against Lebanon, and we stand in solidarity with the government of Lebanon and with Lebanon in this ordeal. What we wanted is to have a ceasefire after the atrocities committed against our people almost 1 year, the Gaza Strip and other parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, and not to see an escalation and expansion of the war to take the form of this aggression against the people in Lebanon and possibly expanding the war further. What we need in Palestine and in the Middle East in general is to stop this aggression and to move in the direction, political horizon, and this illegal occupation, and to allow for the independence of the state of Palestine, East Jerusalem at its capital, in order to have a different environment in the Middle East, not environment of aggression, colonization, occupation, oppression, apartheid, but an environment of people living in peace and concentrating on development and better future for our families and for children, so that we can have the Middle East prospering and becoming a key player in global issues.
Well, to add to this idea, if I could ask you to sort of further develop this idea, why do you think Israel is attacking Lebanon? Aren't they more occupied with the onslaught that's going on in Gaza? And do you think that maybe this is some sort of tactic to keep prolonging the war and expanding the onslaught in general?
Well, significant part of this reason is the selfish, reasoning of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who doesn't want to stop the war, doesn't want to implement the position of the international community reflected in resolutions adopted in the General Assembly and in the Security Council, calling for a ceasefire. And he wanted to prolong this war and to expand it, thinking that he can save his own political future, and perhaps that he wants to continue the war until he sees the results of the American election and make his calculation based on the results of that election.
But do you believe that Israel's actions against Gaza, the West Bank, and now Lebanon are aimed at instigating a wider conflict regionally, or is this just, like you were saying, a tactic to sort of wait and see who's going to win the US elections?
Well, it's all intertwined. The current Israeli government is most extreme in the history of the Israeli government. It has elements in it who are fascist, who want, to completely eliminate the Palestine question and deny the Palestinian people their right to self-determination and their right to have their own independent state, and therefore to make the two-state reality, the two-state solution where there is global consensus around this position, to deny that making that a reality. So that this government is very belligerent against the Palestinian people, that love really to see the Palestinians be expelled from the Gaza Strip, Egypt, and most of the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, to be expelled to Jordan. And therefore, to fulfill the dream, which was legislated in the Knesset, that that historic Palestine from the sea to the river is only the domain of only the Jews to exercise self-determination and no one else. So these are, the ideas of those who are running the government of Israel today. So for them, expanding the war, continuing, the atrocities against the Palestinian people, they think that these are steps that are necessary to fulfill their, very vicious, dreams, and the genocidal war is being put in place in order to possibly accomplish their, dreams, denying the Palestinian people their inalienable rights, including their right to self-determination, statehood, and the return of the refugees.
As you said, sir, that the current government, the current Israeli government, is quite fascist and quite extremist. And also, you said that many countries, 124 countries, have overwhelmingly voted in the UN General Assembly that Palestine deserves UN membership, in addition to asking as well the Israeli side to halt all aggressions and asking for a ceasefire in general. Do you think that with these various pushes from international bodies that Israel could be moving towards more of a pariah state, or is this something that may not happen in the near future and there will be continued support from certain Western countries?
Well, you referred, to two things. One is in May, we went to the General Assembly and received 143 votes supporting the right of the Palestinian people to have their state being admitted as a full member in the United Nations. After, we received the veto in the Security Council in that endeavor. And of course, we received additional rights and privileges that pushed us closer to membership. Recently, we had a resolution based on the historic advisory opinion of the ICJ in which, the ICJ concluded that Israel is violating, international law in all aspects of the rights of the Palestinian people, and that this occupation is it is illegal. Therefore, it has to be terminated as quickly as possible. Based on that, we've adopted this resolution with 124 countries versus only 14 that calls for many things and asked that the General Assembly, international community, and states in their national capacity and others meet their obligations to do everything possible to shorten the life of this illegal occupation and to allow, of course, for the Palestinian people to enjoy their right to self-determination through statehood, and also asked, for countries to do everything possible not to engage in any illegal activities prolonging the life of this, and that occupation has to end within 12 months.
Yes. So, Sir Ambassador, do you think that a backing from the General Assembly to have Palestinian full membership influence the U.S. position? Will they somehow regard these issues as serious and back off from supporting Israel?
We hope so. And it is, a protracted process, and it is not, a silver bullet solution, but it is step by step. And we see that there is a growing empathy, support, and solidarity with the Palestinian people as a result of, among other things, of this genocidal war against our people, particularly in the Gaza Strip, in which a large number of civilians have been killed. Most of them are children and women, in excess of 42,000 people, and possibly 10,000 more who are under the rubble that we were unable, get to them yet, and more than 100,000 people injured and 2 million displaced in different parts of the Gaza Strip. So, that as a result of all these things, we see that the global move, countries, including in the West, including in the United States of America, is moving slowly but surely in the direction of addressing the rights of Palestinians, supporting the movement in the direction of fulfilling the inalienable rights of the Palestinians.
Yes, Sir.
Self-determination.
Yes. Well, as you've said earlier, according to the ICJ, they have recommended or found that Israel is possibly committing genocide, in addition to ICC possibly issuing arrest warrants against members of the Israeli government on account of their conduct in Gaza. Do you think that this could deter the Israelis from violating further international laws? And also, do you think that possibly the international community in general will somehow use, for instance, weapons embargoes against Israel or target certain aspects of the Israeli government to deter them from violating international law?
Well, certainly, that the legal option that we hope that in the ICJ, the National Court of Justice, or the ICC, the National Criminal, Court, do add to collective effort of maximizing the pressure in Israel to change its behavior, to stop from violating international law, and to prepare itself for the evacuation from the occupied territory to allow the Palestinian people to exercise self-determination and statehood on the borders of the 4th of June of 1967 and the return of refugees. But of course, in addition to all these things, we need to resort to additional practical steps, including, sanctions against them, as in the case of South Africa during the period of time of fighting against apartheid. We need to do everything possible and to use all practical steps, including sanctions, so to force them to comply with their obligation under international law and on the basis of relevant UN resolutions, so that we can see change of their illegal behavior and to allow for the beginning of the withdrawal and attainment of the rights of the Palestinians.
Okay, if we could sort of move back to Lebanon, Mr. Ambassador. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians currently live in refugee camps in Lebanon. And some of these camps were subjected to Israeli attacks. Are you concerned about the safety of the Palestinian refugee population in Lebanon?
I am, of course I am. This, vicious Israeli government, which demonstrated its character by this genocidal war against our people, particularly in the Gaza Strip, is capable of carrying the same methods in other places, including in Lebanon. This government that is characterizing, the UNRWA, which is the UN agency that looks after the Palestinians as a terrorist organization, wants to negate the existence of the Palestinian question by, among other things, trying to destroy refugee camps, not only in the occupied territory, but also in places like in Lebanon, because they believe that the existence of UNRWA, the existence of refugee camps, keep the Palestine question alive, and they want to negate the Palestine question and the rights of the Palestinians by waging these wars of atrocities against our people, including our refugee camps in Lebanon, along with the people of Lebanon as a whole, as they are demonstrating every day, particularly in Beirut, in the south, in Sidon, in Tyre, and even Tripoli, as you referred to in the beginning of the program.
Okay, thank you. Palestine's permanent observer to the UN, Ambassador Riyad Mansour. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insights, and hopefully we can talk to you again. We move to Israel, that has escalated its military operations against Lebanon, intensifying strikes in cities like Tripoli for the first time amid a year of rising tensions following the conflict in Gaza.
Intensified the strikes in Lebanon in recent weeks, with Tripoli being targeted for the first time. Despite the growing chaos, daily life in Lebanon continues as residents strive to maintain their routines. Since the start of Israel's war in Gaza a year ago, Lebanon has been on edge, anticipating an incursion from across the border. With Israel's ground offensives escalating earlier this week, the conflict is drawing Lebanon and the wider region deeper into turmoil. While cross-border strikes have buried over the past year, Israel's latest offensive has worsened an already dire humanitarian crisis. A recent strike severed a crucial crossing with Syria, which had allowed tens of thousands to flee Lebanon, signaling Israel's determination to press ahead with its aggression despite regional and international calls for de-escalation. As countries worldwide implement contingency plans to limited avenues for escape from a rapidly escalating conflict that shows no signs of slowing.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has arrived in Damascus to discuss regional developments and bilateral relations with Syrian officials. The foreign minister's visit to Damascus follows his visit to Beirut yesterday. Araghchi's visit to Lebanon was the first official visit since the assassination of Hezbollah Secretary General Nasrallah and the recent intensification of air raids across the country. In a recent statement, Lebanese Industry Minister George Bouchkian called on the international community to exert pressure on Israel to halt its ongoing military operations in Lebanon. He emphasized the necessity of a diplomatic resolution, asserting that such a solution is critical within the framework of established international resolutions. The minister highlighted the importance of UN Resolution 1701, describing it as a fundamental condition that both Israel and Lebanon must adhere to. He lamented that the issue of a ceasefire has been overlooked, but stressed that it remains a crucial and pressing concern. The minister's remarks underscores Lebanon's urgent appeal for global intervention to address the escalating conflict in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, this is live footage from Beirut, where a recent airstrike has hit several locations in Beirut. And in the last few days, there have been heavy bombardments on many areas in the south of Lebanon, in addition to the south of the capital in Lebanon, Beirut. And in 2 months, Israel has managed to assassinate all top commanders of Hezbollah, in addition to destroying in the last few days and weeks several buildings and infrastructures, including civilian buildings, hospitals, and government entities. There are talks of 6 hospitals that are out of commission or close to being out of commission due to heavy bombardment. The death toll has been quite high since these strikes began, which is very recent, and the numbers range in the thousands rather that are also injured due to the heavy bombardments of the Israeli side. And also the Israeli side has said or stated that they will go on small tactical missions within the south of Lebanon, but they continue on with their aerial bombardment, destroying many civilian structures, and almost 1 million Lebanese people have been displaced from their homes. Numbers also are that almost 200,000 have fled Lebanon into Syria. And also, we could add to that the Israeli air forces have bombed the crossing between Lebanon and Syria, making the journey there very dangerous, unsafe, and quite difficult for people to escape the bombardments and the attacks by the Israelis on the south of Lebanon. This has been going on, the tit-for-tat situation between Hezbollah and Israel for the last year, almost last year. But things have escalated in the last 2 months with several targeted attacks on top commanders of Hezbollah. And also in recent weeks, they created a major attack on the south of Lebanon and commanders and members of Hezbollah by detonating 5,000 pagers all at once, injuring hundreds and killing many. And there is a need to add that there are UNIFIL forces in the south of Lebanon. Their mandate is to keep the peace, and this is according to the 1701 UN resolution, demarcation line known as the Blue Line. The Israelis have asked people to move north of the Litani River and asked them to leave their homes in fear for their safety. Israelis have also targeted civil defense workers, including emergency services, firefighters, paramedics, and they have hit hospitals, stopped emergency services from access to the injured and the wounded, stopping them from getting them from underneath the rubble. When the Israelis have targeted many people. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken has announced nearly $157 million in new humanitarian aid to Lebanon. Blinken said that this assistance aims to support both displaced people within Lebanon and the communities hosting them. He added that the aid will provide emergency food, shelter, hygiene kits, water and sanitation services. The UAE has delivered a shipment of humanitarian and medical aid to Lebanon. According to a statement by the UAE Foreign Minister, the move follows the directives of UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed, who approved a $100 million emergency humanitarian aid package for Lebanon. This shipment provided to Lebanon was in cooperation with the World Health Organization. For further analysis on the escalating offensive on Lebanon, we're joined by UNICEF spokesperson Tess Ingram. Welcome, Ms. Ingram. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
What are UNICEF's estimates regarding the number of casualties in Lebanon among children, and what are the conditions of the displaced people in the country's shelters?
In the last couple of weeks, the number of children killed and injured has happened at a rapid pace. We estimate that over 100 children have been killed in that time frame, and almost 700 injured, which is a shocking escalation from the number of children that were killed and injured in the months leading into the last fortnight. So this really is increasing rapidly. And for those children who have managed to flee without harm, the conditions for the displaced are really dire. I've spent this week some time in some of the shelters where people are living, and I spoke to families who told me that they left with almost nothing, families that only have the clothes that they're wearing. One mother told me that the lucky families are the ones that have a change of clothes. And so UNICEF is bringing what we can to these shelters to try and support families get through this immediate period of crisis.
So do you think that we could possibly see the same thing happening in Lebanon as we've seen in Gaza, where, UN facilities had been bombed that sheltered children, in addition to obviously these children not being able to access education for a whole year, and also, the difficult sanitation situations that they're in, leading to many skin diseases and diseases in general?
Well, look, obviously I can't predict what's going to happen in terms of this conflict, but that would be a catastrophe for the children of Lebanon, and UNICEF is urging all parties to the conflict to agree to a ceasefire immediately, and the international community to put pressure on that circumstance to ensure that we don't see that sort of situation here in Lebanon. We can't afford to see it. This is a very vulnerable population that has already been through so much in the last 5 years, including an economic crisis that sent poverty rates soaring, and as well, of course, the Port of Beirut explosion. So families were already having a difficult time before this conflict, and this is really just compounding the situation in a really serious way.
So what is the situation of the children in Lebanon in general right now in light of the ongoing Israeli bombardment? How is UNICEF dealing with them? I'm sure the psychological effect is quite dire.
Yeah, I think the psychological effect is of great concern. Like I said, I've been at shelters talking to children, and on the surface they seem okay, and then the more you speak to them, the more you realize that they're putting on a bit of a brave face, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety and trauma underneath that. Children crying or getting choked up when they try and talk about what has happened to them over the last couple of weeks. I heard harrowing stories of children making journeys from the south to Beirut, seeing explosions along the way. One little girl told me that a car next to them on the highway was hit by an airstrike, and the impact of that blast damaged their car and glass went flying everywhere. So this is just one example of the many different things that children have experienced. And this sort of compound trauma will, of course, have a long-term impact on children's mental health here in Lebanon. So UNICEF is on the ground. We've been in Lebanon for 75 years and we're responding. We're providing mental health and psychosocial services. We're also setting up mobile health clinics. And of course, we're delivering supplies. We've delivered a lot of medical supplies, over 100 tons, with more arriving this weekend. And we're bringing those essentials to shelters like water, medicines, blankets, mattresses, things that people need right away.
Okay, do you think that these effects on the children, as you said, you're providing services when it comes to mental health and everything, but will the effect of this war be permanent on these children?
We really won't know the extent of the long-term impact of this trauma until children feel safe. It's very hard to assess and respond to mental health while a conflict is ongoing and the trauma continues to compound. So once children feel safe, once they're able to reflect on what has happened to them and communicate that, that's when we'll really understand how serious the impact of this trauma will be on the children of Lebanon. But it's safe to say that children are going to require psychosocial and mental health support now and in the days and weeks to come.
Okay, Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati issued an urgent call to international organizations to allow medical authorities to evacuate the casualties from the targeted areas. How do you see the international community's response to this call, and how will UNICEF also respond to this call to action?
UNICEF is here. We're doing everything we can to support children wherever they are, whether that's in hospitals, in communities, in shelters, from south to north. The challenges are great, and the international community does really need to step in here to ensure that the children of Lebanon receive the support that they need in this time of crisis. UNICEF is appealing for US $105 million for the next 3 months for our response. And of course, there are other agencies and the government of Lebanon that are also responding. So it's important that the international community gets behind these efforts to protect the children of Lebanon.
If we could go back to the idea of mental health, do you think that this could possibly in the future, I know you don't want to talk about long-term things as long as the war is going, but do you think that mental health could also affect the development of children in general?
Yes, we know that there are many aspects of a child's life that can affect its long-term development. Its nutrition is one. If children don't get adequate nutrition early in life, they can be stunted or wasted. They're technical terms that basically mean the growth of a child's body is altered, and that can have a long-term impact on them in terms of their ability to enter the workplace or perform well in school. And mental health has the same sort of impacts, that if a child has compound trauma early in life, that can stay with them for the rest of their life and have consequences for many years to come.
And as a spokesperson for UNICEF, what steps would you urge the international community to take to tackle the situation in Lebanon and end this cycle of violence?
So first of all, our main call is to the parties of conflict to have a ceasefire. That's the number one thing that we can do to protect children in Lebanon. The international community can aid in that effort by ensuring loud advocacy for that ceasefire. That's the number one thing that we really need. But beyond that, support for humanitarian organizations like UNICEF is critical to make sure that we can continue our work to support the children of Lebanon. That can be through both providing humanitarian aid and supplies, but also funds so that we can continue our work. The other thing we really need is for supply routes to remain open. Of course, many airlines have cancelled their flights into Lebanon because of the security situation, and that makes it challenging for us to bring in that life-saving aid. And we are managing. We've got, as I said, some medical supplies arriving by plane this weekend, but we need to ensure that those supply routes remain open, land, air and sea, so that aid can get in.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tess Ingram, the spokesperson for UNICEF. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insights. We move to dark clouds of smoke that were seen over Lebanon's capital, Beirut. A series of loud explosions were heard near Beirut airport, with smoke seen nearby. Fighter jets were heard overhead. Israeli strikes pummeled Beirut once again as residents ran for shelters and echoing blasts in the southern suburbs that sent huge plumes of smoke and flame into the night sky. Displaced civilians in Beirut have been seen seeking shelter on beaches amid continuous Israeli bombing. Beirut's waterfront has found itself lined with the tents of sheltering families displaced by Israeli strikes. Blasts were heard and smoke was seen over Beirut's southern suburbs after the Israeli military issued 3 alerts for residents of the area to immediately evacuate. The United Nations has condemned the rising civilian death toll from relentless Israeli attacks on Lebanon. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric highlighted the increasing injuries among rescue workers and announced that an additional $2 million for Lebanon's humanitarian fund would be allocated to address the worsening situation. The Embassy of the Arab Republic of Egypt has announced that a significant shipment of medical and humanitarian aid will arrive at Rafiq Hariri International Airport in Beirut aboard an Egypt Air flight. This delivery is part of Egypt's ongoing support for the Lebanese people amid difficult circumstances. The Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs had previously issued a statement regarding the situation of Egyptians in Lebanon amid Israeli bombardments and the military operations declared by Tel Aviv. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ati conducted a phone call with Egypt's ambassador to Beirut, Ala Musa, to discuss the rapidly evolving situation in Lebanon and to ensure the well-being of the Egyptian community there. Spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, Ambassador Tamim Khalaf, stated that the ambassador provided a detailed report on field developments in Lebanon and the condition of the Egyptian community, confirming that to date, the Egyptian embassy has not recorded any casualties among Egyptian citizens in Lebanon as a result of Israeli attacks. The spokesperson added that the foreign minister has instructed the ambassador to continue monitoring the situation of the Egyptian community and to provide them with all necessary support. Additionally, the Egyptian ambassador in Beirut has been directed to receive a medical aid shipment, which was ordered for expedited dispatch to Lebanon during a conversation with the Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati on September 28th. The Egyptian ambassador in Beirut noted that the directives from the Egyptian president in this regard are widely appreciated by the Lebanese people. In a phone call with the Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reaffirmed his nation's full support for Lebanon, emphasizing its commitment to safeguarding the country's security, sovereignty, stability, and territorial integrity. For further information on the Egyptian stance and the aid shipments to Lebanon, we now move to Mr. Ayman Salema, Professor of International Law. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Sir, are you still with us? Yes, there seems to be a slight technical problem. We'll get back to him. But as you can see now, there's live footage of Lebanon and Beirut. It seems that we've managed to get back Mr. Ayman Salema, a professor of international law. Thank you again for joining us.
Yes, how are you? I listen you very carefully, and you are asking me about the Egyptian political stance towards what's going on in Lebanon. The Egyptian focal and the crucial support for Lebanon is not astonishing. This is the Egyptian actually approach towards all the neighboring countries, the sisterly Arab countries, and even non-Arab countries. Egypt, from the from the outset, from the inception of the conflict between Hezbollah and the Israeli occupying forces a week ago, Egypt supported Lebanon and condemned all the hostilities, adversaries, aggression, and all the grave violations of humanitarian law committed and perpetrated by the Israeli occupying forces, occupying armies in the southern Lebanon.
What I wanted to focus on was basically Egypt's support for Lebanon, especially with the phone call from President Sisi and directives to send humanitarian aid to Lebanon. How significant is this from the top level?
Yes, as you've mentioned right now, under His Excellency directives and instructions to the executives and operatives, institutions, establishments, even the armed forces here in Egypt, in a flash already dispatched shipments, medical humanitarian aids, necessities, etc., to the distressed Lebanese people. This is not a surprise because this is the norm of Egypt since many times. I remember, and all the audience remember, within or during the civil war in Lebanon that lasted in 1990, Egypt was the single Arab country that dispatched and envoyed a special representative of late President Anwar Sadat at the time. Egypt concerns a lot in this regard, just to alleviate the deterioration, hardships of that distressed people, the Lebanese, our brotherly people over there in Lebanon. That's why the Egyptian, His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, ordered and directed all the Egyptian institutions. Probably we can mention just examples, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Transportation, etc., the Egyptian armed forces, which is always on the alert in these humanitarian crises, not only to the Lebanese people, however, to all brotherly and non-Arab countries in such wars or humanitarian crises.
So, sir, from your perspective, you think that Egypt's official stance is in line with the historical stances of Egypt in general, where we utterly condemn, or Egypt utterly condemns the Israeli aggression against Lebanon?
Egypt stands in all wars, all armed conflicts and crises. Egypt depends and relies on, grounded on international law, international humanitarian law. That's why Egypt is a member state to the United Nations and effectively and inherently abide by and comply by the charter provisions. That's why the Egyptian stance, political, diplomatic stance, political support to Lebanon as a state and the Lebanese government, the Lebanese people, is crucial and grounded based upon international law, customs, norms, and rules.
Mm-hmm. President Sisi had emphasized full support for Lebanon in the face of the Israeli aggression. What are your comments on the official Egyptian statements regarding the situation right now in Lebanon?
The Egyptian stance, the political stance, cannot be changed. It cannot be amended to circumstances. Egyptian stance towards aggression, occupation, annexation of territories of states, the Egyptian stance is the same in Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, West Bank, etc. That's why I confirm you are the audience that the Egyptian stance towards Lebanon under international law, also under humanitarian international law, is consistent with international law and in full accordance with the principles and rules of international law besides humanitarian international law.
So the Egyptian foreign minister had instructed the Egyptian ambassador in Beirut to personally receive the aid shipments sent to Lebanon. How do you perceive Egypt's special interest or significant interest in ensuring that this aid reaches the Lebanese people?
This gesture, this message to the whole world, the same Egyptian stance, reiterated today and yesterday and the last week by the Egyptian ambassador to Lebanon, and also via or through the telephone calls, the telephone supportive call from His Excellency President Fattah Sisi to the interim government president, Mr. Mikati. That's why the same thing is happening in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Syria, in Iraq, in all Arab states under armed conflicts, under wars, or during wars, or even under or within humanitarian crisis.
So will we witness a significant increase of Egyptian aid shipments to Lebanon in the upcoming period following the President's directives, President Abdel Fattah Sisi's directives?
Yeah, I would like to remind everybody that also with the neighboring country Libya, within the outest of the uprising in Libya, 2011, the same thing happened on the neighboring country Libya, and Egypt actually supported the Libyan people, etc., the Sudanese within their civil war. The same thing is happening in Lebanon, because actually the Lebanese government since the 70s and prior to the 70s last century always actually demanded the Egyptian political support, humanitarian aid, etc. I remember even just years after the independence of Lebanon in 1943, or also after the evacuation of the French forces from Lebanon and Syria, 1946, the Egyptian ambassador since the 40s last century had been playing a very focal and crucial role in Lebanon.
Yes, we understand the point, but unfortunately we're running out of time for this segment. So Professor Ayman Salema, Professor of International Relations, thank you so much for joining us over the Zoom call, and to also further help us analyze the escalating offensive on Lebanon, we're now joined by Professor of International Law, Dr. Khalid Dawood, the Managing Editor of Al Ahram Weekly. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
What is your opinion on Egypt's substantial support towards Lebanon following the directives by President Abdel Fattah Sisi?
Well, I think it reflects the very special relationship between Egypt and Lebanon that goes way decades back, if not like hundreds of years back. I mean, out of all the Arab countries, Lebanon is one of the closest to Egypt. We've had many Lebanese coming over to Egypt, and having business here and staying here. So there's a lot of mixture on many levels between Egypt and Lebanon, and probably that's, as far as I understood, is going to be the first kind of dispatch of assistance that Egypt is going to be offering to Lebanon in those extremely difficult circumstances, and more is expected to follow. Actually, I remember that in all the previous wars and military clashes that Lebanon has had, Egypt was always at the forefront of the Arab countries that would provide aid to Lebanon. If you would recall, in 2006, after the vicious war Israel conducted against Lebanon, it was Egypt that took the responsibility of fixing all the electricity grids in Lebanon. And we also saw the former president, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, heading towards Lebanon himself to declare solidarity with the Lebanese people and to confirm our rejection for this aggression that the Israelis have been conducting against the Lebanese. So, I mean,
Yes.
this is just the first step, and I'm sure more will follow.
So, as you said, sir, that in general, Egypt has always long supported the Lebanese and Lebanon, the nation. So how would you interpret Egypt's official condemnation of the Israeli attacks on Lebanon? Is it of significance for the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government? Caretaker
I
government?
think it's very important because Egypt, of course, is the largest Arab country. It has actually been a vital role in the entire peace process since we signed our own peace agreement in 1979. And probably Egypt's opinion carries a lot of weight in the Arab world, as well as our international relations, particularly with the United States. We're also a strategic ally of the United States. And this condemnation, together with that of other major Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and others, sends a clear message to the Americans that what Egypt has been warning from, what President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has been warning from since day one of the Gaza war, that this war is
Which kind of, sir, brings me to the next idea. I mean, as you were saying, that Egypt is a heavyweight within the region, and the president himself was one of the people that expressed strong support for Lebanon against the Israeli aggression. It wasn't just, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Egypt that came out with a statement, but also the president himself spoke about it. So what are your thoughts on these statements, and how important is it that the president himself spoke about it?
I mean, this reflects the dangerous situation that we're in. I mean, since day one, the Gaza war started, Egypt has been extremely influential in trying to reach a ceasefire agreement in order to end the war in Gaza. And actually, what happened in Lebanon over the past few weeks confirmed the key Egyptian fear that if we don't stop the war in Gaza, this definitely will turn into an all-out regional war, which is going to bring more destruction, more economic suffering to the peoples of the region. So that's why actually, the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the Egyptian Foreign Ministry have been clear from the beginning of this war in Gaza that if you want to calm down the Lebanese front, if you want to calm down the Yemeni front in terms of the attacks by the Houthis, if you want to stop the attacks coming out from Iraq, the key to this is to stop the war in Gaza and to go back to a real peace process that would assure that we don't keep on going back to those kinds of military confrontations, which are mainly a result of the continuation of the Israeli occupation and the war against Gaza. And then we're going to have the chance to kind of work on a true peace process. But if we continue with this current Israeli right-wing government policy of expanding wars and hitting in nearly every surrounding Arab country in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Yemen, and in Iran. So definitely this is not a recipe for peace at all. It just makes matter worse, and that's why Egypt's view on this matter, along with other key Arab countries, should carry weight, especially with the United States, the key provider of weapons and diplomatic cover to the Israelis. So I hope that the United States, even though we're into an election month, but still, but the American interests are at stake, and they should definitely do more to stop their ally from carrying out those attacks. And the key tool they have in their hands, the Americans, is the weapons they keep on providing Israel with. Without those weapons, I don't think Israel would have been able to withstand its attacks against Gaza, against Lebanon, against Syria, against Yemen. Definitely impossible to do all this without Americans.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Khalid Dawood, the Professor of International Law. Thank you so much for your insights, but unfortunately we're out of time for this segment and for the special coverage. As we continue to monitor the unfolding crisis in Lebanon and the wider region, the situation remains volatile with no clear path to de-escalation in sight. Our coverage will continue throughout the evening, bringing you the latest updates on the escalating conflict within the region. But this concludes our coverage for this hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. For real-time updates, connect with us on the UMS digital platform. Watch it. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q.